Friday. It's the first Friday of the month. It's 1 o'clock, so you know what that means. It's time for Ask the Dietitian. It is really such a fun program because the participants have the opportunity to ask me the questions that they have related to the topic of the month. This month's topic is all about, as you can see on your screen, emotional eating, which I thought was appropriate for this time of year because there's a little bit more stress, emotions are running high. So sometimes that can take its toll on what we eat, how much we eat. And while really that's acceptable, 1000% acceptable, I think sometimes when we empower ourselves to really take charge of the way that we eat and how we interact with food, it can only offer us even better nutrition and better wellness. So that's why we chose the topic for today. We had a handful of great questions that were submitted. We just a little bit more about me as well. I'm the dietitian here at Cancer Wellness Center. I'm board certified as a specialist in oncology nutrition, so it's all I do. I work with individuals one-on-one, and then I do present programs. We have lots of great stuff coming up in the new year, so do check out the calendar or sign up for those email blasts so that you can stay well informed about what's coming. And also too, if you are curious to see former Ask the Dietitian presentations, you can always check out our YouTube channel. So right on Cancer Wellness Center YouTube channel, you can subscribe to that as well. You get the opportunity to really see a whole list of different programs and services that are offered here. So without further ado, why don't we get started? So I included this image here because I think like I've seen this a handful of times before. And I feel like what I like about mindfulness as it relates to maybe approaching emotional eating is that maybe it does give us a chance to sort of slow down, as you see, and sort of pay attention. But the key to mindfulness is that we're reserving judgment. So whatever language like we hear, like our self-talk, we want it to be really kind and gentle and compassionate. And I think that is especially important for the people that I work with who have been through so much and maybe feel a little guilty or ashamed for eating a certain way because they're concerned that maybe they might make their cancer worse or make it recur. And so I think it's really important to stay well informed, work with a dietitian to understand what the best choices are for you specifically. But also too, I think it's important to kind of quiet down those external pressures that we sometimes can feel that, or go against what we internally want for ourselves in regard to eating. And so those external pressures don't do us any good either, right? And sometimes they can kind of perpetuate this whole emotional eating cycle, which we're going to talk about a little bit more today. Okay, so cool little image, but I do see like a lot of instructions there, a lot of do's and don'ts. And I think sometimes it's important to understand that what works for you is really the right way, right? There's no right or wrong. It's the way that works for you that matters most. All right, so on the agenda today, I'm just going to quickly go over what emotional eating is, and then list those questions and provide the answers to the best of my ability to each of them. And then in every Ask the Dietitian program, I like to offer additional resources so that if you're tempted to explore more and learn more information about what we're talking about, then I want to direct you to some trustworthy sources of information, including websites. And then typically I like to include some recipes that might sort of apply this information so that you can sort of, in a practical way, make and choose and eat and really enjoy some nutritious and delicious options. All right, so emotional eating is sort of defined this way. Well, I would say this is the definition of emotional eating. It is when it's a behavior when we consume food in excessive amounts, and that's sort of the operative word there, in order to cope with or to soothe emotional or psychological distress. It can lead to overeating and an increased consumption of high calorie, less healthy foods, which are everywhere in our environment. They seem to be ever present this time of year as well, right? What's up with that? So it sort of takes advantage, right, of our vulnerable state at this time of year. Here's the thing, it is natural for us to eat for emotional reasons. So I don't want you to think that, if you eat for emotional reasons, you're bad or you should feel guilty or ashamed. It's very normal. It's what humans do, and it's going to happen here and there, right? So we want to, again, use that compassion and forgive those times, or maybe explore with a little bit of curiosity, especially after I present today. Here's why it's natural for us to eat for emotional reasons. Eating can raise our spirits when we don't feel good. We know this for a fact. It can soothe us when we feel tense, and it certainly can distract us when we are upset. I think that's very often that one's very common for people I work with, is sort of a distraction. We cook special meals to celebrate, especially this time of year, right? And we use food to help us connect with other people. I think, especially during the pandemic, we learned that was an important aspect of food, in that if we weren't able to dine out or to visit with friends and loved ones and enjoy a meal, we really were isolated, and that's not a good feeling either. So I think it's important to think about how food can offer us so many different things besides nutrition and pleasure. It's also definitely connection. Here's the thing, when we abuse, and that's the operative word there, when we abuse emotional eating, this seems to be concerning. This is when our feelings go straight towards eating, no matter what. So if we're feeling upset or any sort of distress, uncomfortable, if we're bored, they go straight to eating. That's the only remedy. That's the only thing we do that settles us down. That's when there might be some opportunity for improvement. So when we abuse emotional eating, we often eat to feel better or to suppress our feelings. Most of my colleagues here would say that that's not the goal, right? We want to sort of confront and work through our feelings. We tend to eat fast, and we might not be paying attention to what we're eating. I know in the world of digestion, that's not the best for us, right? And we end up feeling guilty and sort of unsatisfied sometimes, especially if we're not paying attention to what we're eating. And we certainly can feel out of control. And that's not necessarily good for us either, right? If we can first recognize how we are feeling and even what we're feeling, then we can cope and help ourselves cope with that. Often restrained eating increases the abuse of emotional eating. So I'm going to say that in another way. Like, so if we tell ourselves, no, 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 off limits, can't do that, can't do that, can't do that, that we know is sort of a setup, and that we're probably going to eventually crack, right? And we're going to emotionally eat, because that restraint is there's no way to overcome that in time. We're going to eventually want to overeat. And what happens is it sort of creates a cycle. And this cycle is very common. I work with a lot of people who are working through this cycle as best as they can. If we restrain ourselves, eventually we're going to overeat. Then we feel bad about it. So then we double back and we start to restrain again. And it's just a cycle, right? And we want to just sort of start to recognize that cycle, maybe stop it, or even start to reverse that cycle. So how do we address this abuse of emotional eating? That's a pretty strong word, but it demonstrates a point, right? What the experts say is that we might want to consider eating regularly and reliably. It's always important to eat to hunger, right? Like, so if we're hungry, that's probably a sign that we should be eating. And if we're not hungry, then maybe we don't need to eat. But if we think about sort of creating a rhythm because we're listening intuitively to our body and its signs, probably we will find that there is sort of a routine to this with eating. And if we think about that day in and day out, it sort of unties us from thinking about food all the time, right? And we're going to talk about that a little more too. I absolutely would suggest setting aside restrained eating, right? Because typically when we do that, first of all, it's like so refreshing, right? It's like all this energy built up. I can't do this. I can't have that. I have to avoid that. So what we want to do is maybe incorporate the things that we feel are sometimes off limits. It's okay to incorporate those in small amounts, especially if we're already eating such a healthful diet. And that's where a dietitian can help you understand how to make sense of that for yourself. We do want to go to the table hungry and trust that we will eat until we're satisfied. We've got to trust our bodies, right? Understand and know and be present and know what we're feeling emotionally as we're eating. Because if we know what we're feeling, it can help us choose how to be and what to do, right? If we know that we're feeling stressed, maybe there's something else that we can do about it besides eating, because maybe the food isn't going to fix the stress, for example. Remember that it's always okay to eat, but first find out what you're feeling That can help us really navigate through this. Now, I do want to share this. If you do suspect that you think you have a significant concern with emotional eating, or even maybe disordered eating or an eating disorder, there are some really helpful resources available. There's this link for those who registered. You'll click right on the link on the slide, and it'll bring you to a screening tool. It's always, I think not a bad idea to explore, or just to ask for help. Of course, you can always ask your healthcare provider if it's something that you're working through. All right, so let's go to those questions, those great questions that were submitted. I wanted to start here. I think this is a great question. What is food noise? Has anyone heard of that yet? That could probably be a whole Ask the Dietitian. All right, so food noise is constant and obsessive food ruminations that are hard to suppress and can potentially even interfere with daily life. So here's some examples. It's like fixating, right? So think of that word, you're fixated, like nothing is shaking you out of it. You're fixated on what, when, and how much to eat, like all day, every day. You're planning your next meal before having finished the current one. You're compulsively checking restaurant menus or delivery platforms. You're stressing about the perceived consequences of food choices. And you're restricting calories to punish yourself for an intense food craving. All of these are examples of food noise. And the idea here is that it's compulsive, it's stressful, it's restriction, it's fixation, right? So like you are stuck, you're attached to this, right? And you really can't break free from it. However it might manifest for the person, the impact, of course, on life and eating behavior can be harmful, and it can be overwhelming to our physical and mental health. Experiencing food noise is often the result of a past trauma or exposure that led us to disordered behaviors. And social media is not helping, and our diet culture isn't helping, because it seems to have only amplified these behaviors for a lot of people. Mainstream nutritional advice, not the type of advice you get from a dietitian like me, but mainstream nutrition advice might tell someone to restrict foods that are important to their culture, right? So, or to consume foods that aren't even part of their culture. And I think that's important to bring up, because I think, like, historically, traditionally, there might be foods that are celebrated and enjoyed and certainly nutritious. But, depending on where you're getting your information from, you might hear that those are no-nos, and that's not really fair, right? Is that appropriate information? No. This can all lead to emotional distress. So we know food noise is a problem, right? How can we silence food noise? We want to confront it, right? We want to recognize that we're having those thoughts and those feelings, and we want to consider how we could reframe our personal beliefs about food, because chances are that's exactly what's going on, right? There's some restraint, or you're worried about what you're going to eat when you go out to eat. We want to think about, do you need to worry as much, or do you just need guidance from a healthcare professional or a dietitian like me? We want to create awareness around food noise, right? So again, we're just mindful, we're paying attention, we're not judging it, we're just aware of it. And when we do that, we need to be compassionate towards ourselves to overcome any shame, and absolutely you can change the narrative in terms of what you're thinking in your head. Establish consistent and reliable eating schedule. I mentioned that earlier. That seems to be key for a lot of this. It seems like what that does, in my opinion, is that it gives us a sense of control, right? We're not overly controlled about it, right? Because that would be restrictive in a way, but we're sort of empowered because we're in charge and we're making the decisions about what to eat and when. Chronic eating restraint can lead to hunger, and again, is a setup of the cycle of overeating, shame, and restriction over and over again. We want to listen to our innate hunger and fullness cues. We've got to trust our bodies. I think that there is the potential for that in the world of oncology, because maybe you're feeling like, my body let me down. I got diagnosed. I don't know what happened. I don't know my body. But I think returning to that is an important step, and doing that in the realm of eating and eating behaviors, I think, is a great way to try to pursue that. We have these internal signals, and they communicate hunger. They communicate when we're full. They communicate when we're satisfied too, right? And recognizing these cues can allow us to trust our body and respond to what it's asking for. Okay. Really powerful. Next question, would taking medications such as Ozempic help with curbing emotional eating? I'm so glad this question was asked. I kind of wish I could spend another Ask the Dietitian on something like Ozempic. Maybe we will in the future. So Ozempic is one example of an incretin-based therapy, and it's an example of a GLP-1 agonist. And GLP-1 agonist, Ozempic's not the only one. It catalyzes the GLP-1 hormone. I'm sharing this so that you can like impress all your friends and family members about this language, right? So you can go home and tell them glucagon like peptide 1. That's GLP-1, is a hormone that's released in the gut in response to eating to signal fullness and satiety, which suppresses appetite and reduces craving. So when we're turning on that hormone constantly, we're having these responses. We're feeling full. We're not even hungry, right? That food noise gets quieted, right? We don't even have cravings because it's just constantly on. Ozempic is approved, just for your information, for the treatment of type 2 diabetes. That's what it's approved for. Sometimes it's not always used in that way or prescribed that way. Wegovy, Mounjaro, and Zepbound are approved for the treatment of obesity. All of these are not approved for use to treat emotional eating or disordered eating. Okay, so that's important to point out. Most of them curb short-term binge eating. However, there have been plenty of reports that people have engaged in emotional eating behaviors while they were on Ozempic. It didn't seem to kind of fix that issue. Sometimes when people adjust to their dose, and that's why there's sort of a tapering, sometimes up and down of things like Ozempic, when people adjust to their dose, they find that their cravings could return and their ability to emotionally eat could also resurface. Supply issues are always a concern, and if someone who is like really emotionally vested to believe that Ozempic is necessary, it's the thing that they need in order to control their appetite and intake, as well as their weight, they may be distressed if they're unable to access it, right? Or if they're finding they don't have the finances to pay for it. That's very stressful, right? Especially if you feel like so dependent upon it. Some are concerned that, and these are, the experts that are in this field, some are concerned that incretin therapy is feeding into the problem of diet culture. I'm starting to feel that way more and more. We know that diet culture is associated with the increase in food fear, avoidance of food, and disordered eating. Diet culture has been around for decades. It's not helping us, right? And I think the more we can combat it and turn towards an understanding of what really matters in terms of food, nutrition, social connection, pleasure of eating, and health and our health outcomes. If we understand what that's all about, diet culture gets really quieted down, right? Because we really know the truth, right? And diet culture is not that. This is an important statement. I think if you hear anything from me today, hopefully this is it, that diet culture normalizes disordered eating thoughts and habits. Think about that. Okay, so anytime you encounter something like a statement or an account on social media or anything, I mean, your salon, anything you might hear, there is this culture that makes it okay to eat in a way that's disordered or think about food in a way that's disordered. Incretin therapy may also trigger a different eating disorder. I don't often I only have a handful of people that I know that I've worked with that are on some of these medications. I haven't encountered this, but I could see where that could be a possibility. And a lot of times that is the case with eating disorders, or that they sort of morph into different ones at different times. So it's very important to acknowledge that. Binge eating disorder could, for example, return into like a restrictive type of eating, for example. The most important strategy in order to address emotional eating is to address the reason for the emotional eating, right? And think about, are there other ways to cope with emotion other than food? Cognitive behavioral therapy has been shown to be helpful, and a licensed professional counselor could certainly help you explore that. Understand that prescriptions are not ultimately addressing the root cause of the problem. and that other solutions do exist, right? So probably, yes, the answer to this question is that yes, it probably does quiet food noise, it quiets emotional eating, but is it really solving the problem? No, probably not, unless the work is being done alongside taking the medication, right? That I could support. But if that's not being considered or disregarded, then you're not really solving the problem, right? So there are some other solutions. What might they be? Well, that leads us into the next question. So, great question. Does exercise help keep emotional eating at bay? You betcha. So every individual with emotional eating is unique, right? And worthy of respect as such, right? So everyone's going to require a different plan, a different approach in terms of how to address emotional eating. But we do know that regular exercise is associated with mood improvements. They occur, here's how they occur. Right after you've had a nice bout of physical activity, right? So people report feeling acutely like kind of their energy's lifted, their mood's lifted. And then we see this also chronically improving mood over time. Cool, right? Bonus. And it doesn't take a lot. So as few as 3 sessions of moderate intensity walking per week can consistently reduce anxiety and depressed mood in adults who embark on an exercise program. Really good stuff. Good to know. What exercise also does is it empowers us to understand that we are not helpless victims of emotional eating, but we can leverage the positive, healthy behaviors of exercise to kind of counteract those unhealthy eating habits. It doesn't mean that exercise is punishment, right? I hear a lot of people say things like that. Oh, I ate this much. My gym the day after Thanksgiving was packed. I don't know about anyone else. But it was like, what's going on here? You know, we don't want to punish our bodies because we ate differently one day, right? We want to embrace this as a lifestyle. We know that that's what's most important. The magic of co-action is something to discuss here. So when maybe we embark in a physical activity program, maybe we've never done anything before and we start from scratch and we're just brand new with this. When we do that, we're going to eventually build and improve confidence about our ability to be active. And this in turn will improve our confidence to address other areas in our lives, like how we're going to eat, like how we're going to handle emotional eating. Really cool. Physical activity improves self-efficacy, right? So if you aren't familiar with that term, self-efficacy is really defined as feelings of competence, ability, and mastery, right? Like I can do this, I have the ability to do this, which plays a crucial role in mitigating emotional eating. It's worth noting that the amount of exercise performed did not have a dose response effect with mood change or even weight loss. So that's just a nice aside just to talk about. So because our society tends to think the more the better, we might assume that, oh, we have to exercise all day, every day, and we have to really be intense, we do it for long periods of times. Not necessarily, right? So that 3 times per week seemed to be like the magic number. Really great. So 3 sessions of moderate intensity exercise per week. That's what maximized the effect. I love that because again, I don't think that's diet culture, right? Here we're hearing the facts. This is from research studies. So we're seeing that this is all it takes, right? And this is doable and this is sustainable, more importantly. And so it really can affect some impactful change. Next question. What are some other strategies or things we can do to stop or curb emotional eating? And how can family help as well? Always such great questions. All right, how to help ourselves. So it's recommended that we identify some patterns, right? Like because we're unique right. So like we all eat certain ways, we all have different eating habits and behaviors. We all have different triggers for why we do what we do, right? So identifying what those patterns are because we're paying attention, because we have a curiosity about what we're doing, it can help provide a lot of insight that are necessary in order to help us figure out what to do about it. Recognize what drives us to eat, right? So as soon as we're identifying patterns, we're also identifying what type of emotions I'm having when I turn to food, right? Or is that the reason why I'm turning to food because of certain emotions? Being curious about it is important, right? And what they're telling us is a good thing, right? We don't want to think that yes, it's sometimes hard. It's not fun to feel stress or anxiety or depression or, having a low mood or feeling unmotivated. That doesn't feel good, right? But the more we work through that, the easier it becomes and the more capable we are at handling that. I'm just taking that phone off. Okay, next. How to help ourselves further? We can think beyond the scale. So, do your feelings about your food or your weight influence how you interact with food? Okay, really important. So, I think that, we have this sort of in diet culture, this pressure that if we weigh a certain amount, we're good people, right? If we look a certain way, we're good people. So some foods are allowed in order to make us help us do that. Some foods are absolutely off the list if we want to accomplish that. That's not true either, right? What we know is that all foods can fit and we can pursue the weight and the body type that we want for ourselves in a way that incorporates all different food choices. So considering a broad approach and the purpose of food in your life is really sort of refreshing, in my opinion. Give yourself grace if you fall back into emotional eating, which is guaranteed to happen. We are flawed humans, right? We are messy. We're going to do this every so often. Take the time to reflect without judgment about what happened, what went wrong there, right? And what may help us the next time. How others might be able to help us. This is the best I could come up with. I'm sure there's probably more, but I hopefully you'll feel like this is very helpful information. So if we want other people to help us, especially like people involved in our food environment, right? Like people in our home, if we want or need our loved ones to support us, we got to communicate that to them, right? And in a way where we feel like we can be confident and express whatever it is that we're thinking and feeling and needing from them. We want to be direct and specific about that. And if they're interested, ask them ways that they can support you, and that it might be something that you feel like you need to do on your own, or you might want to involve your loved ones with more specific things. Perhaps it's something like not talking about good or bad foods, right? Not saying, why'd you eat that? You told me you didn't want to eat that, right? Or it could be like maybe they can help, go grocery shopping or try a new recipe out or try a new restaurant or a new item at the restaurant because that's what you're curious to try. And to be supportive. Just like we are supportive of other people, of our children, our grandchildren, our pets, we're very compassionate, right? We're very supportive. We're very forgiving. We want to do that for ourselves. And so to expect our loved ones to give us that same understanding, right? That same compassion, I think is really important here. And then hopefully you can, with ample communication, you can move forward in a way that works for everybody. It could be anything that you need and deserve, right? That you're asking for, right? It's really up to you. I don't know if I have any other specific ideas, but that's your call. And that's where again, it empowers you because you're in charge and only you decide what to put into your body, right? So when you're really taking that opportunity to do what's best for you and what serves you, then that's the best we can ever ask for. Next question. How are dehydrated vegetables and air fried beans for emotional eating? All right, good question. So these two, they're super delicious, right? I eat them regularly. They are in my pantry. I pick them up wherever I go. I probably have them in the car. They're here in my desk somewhere. They're really nice, convenient options. But do they really get to the root of the issue? That's what we got to ask here, right? Is this a band-aid, right? Is it just is it a temporary way to start to gain control over the situation? Maybe, maybe you want to, instead of emotionally eating the bag of chips or the bag of cookies, maybe you want to substitute it with something that's a little bit more nutritious. Okay, that's a step in the direction. However, it's still not really getting to the root of the issue, right? Ultimately, no matter what we eat during an emotional eating episode, it still is emotional eating, right? So we want to think about that. If we feel a little bit better about ourselves because we chose something that's a little bit more nutritious, okay. But if you agree that you want to cope with your emotions and what you're feeling in other ways besides resorting to food, great, because there's opportunities there as well, for sure. And hopefully I gave you some examples today. Next question, how bad is eating sugary foods post-active treatment in order to combat fatigue and gain some energy? Not quite related to the topic, but it sort of plays in here, right? So sugary foods are not bad. They really are not bad for us, right? It's how much. That's the problem. So sugary beverages, especially in excess, they seem to be problematic. So after years of consuming sugary beverages, we know from the evidence that that can lead to weight gain over time. So sugary beverages are a bit of a concern. Sugary foods, we don't have as much data. It's not as strong of data, but we know that they are relatively high calorie and that they're a little less nutritious. So if we tend to overconsume them in a lifestyle, then we might eventually gain some weight over time. Okay, but here and there, not bad, not harmful, not going to cause any problems, right? There's a lot of other things that we do and don't do that contribute to weight gain over time. So we don't want to like blame, we don't want to hyper focus in on sugar and sugar so bad, right? When we want to, like, again, think broader picture here. What else could I do? Maybe this is just a temporary time, and maybe there's other ways that I can start to incorporate things in my lifestyle, things in my diet to help me through this, phase. It's important to allow yourself grace, right? If you find that those sugary foods are helping your fatigue, who am I to say take away the sugary foods, right? Because if your fatigue is improved, that's all I care about. Fatigue is nothing to joke about. But that's why we know there's some proven ways to reduce fatigue. Did you know that? So let's talk about them. So I just presented this past week to our group here, and then we have a support group for multiple myeloma, and a lot of questions were asked about how to handle fatigue and how to reduce fatigue related to their multiple myeloma, but any cancer type we see there is definitely this prevalence, high degree of prevalence for cancer-related fatigue, and there are effective interventions for that. And guess what? A lot of them are amazing and supportive and are going to help you in more ways than one. Not only are they going to reduce fatigue, but they're also going to help in other ways. They're going to probably improve your mood, right? You're going to want to make different food choices. Maybe you're going to feel motivated to be more active, which, by the way, activity lowers fatigue. We know this for a fact. But if you're curious to learn about acupuncture, mindfulness, yoga, guess what? Cancer Wellness Center has it all. So if you want to explore that for yourself and do it in a way where you know you have a qualified professional that can guide you, you can certainly explore this and really build like this. It's almost like tools in your toolbox to fix the problem. And you can take out tools at different times to help fix the issue. Okay, so I would encourage that for sure. Now, in the world of nutrition, of course, because I'm a dietitian, there is this interest in what they call a fatigue reduction diet, and it's anti-inflammatory, it's high in antioxidants. It has been shown in a couple small studies to improve fatigue, really great. And this is what it looks like. So in a typical day, it's encouraging a good amount of whole grains, a good amount of vegetables and fruit, especially dark leafy, yellow or orange, and then a tomato, because it happens to be high in some of our anti-inflammatory compounds. And then fruit, especially ones that have some vitamin C in it. And then fatty fish, as well as omega-3 fats from things like walnuts, flax seeds, chia seeds, all because those things are going to accumulate the anti-inflammatory potential. And they're also going to saturate the amount of antioxidants that you consume in your diet. So this way of eating, if you ask me, is really healthy anyway, right? But it's really fascinating that it's begun to show for our post-treatment survivors, this reduction in fatigue. Really, really good stuff. If you want to learn more about that, there's a great article. The research has been done out of Ohio State University. And when you get these slides, you can click on that link. It'll give you like a nice story. There's some like examples from people involved in the study that really nice stories about how they improved how they were feeling with their energy and their fatigue because they pursued this activity as well as a different way of eating. So this question is quite wordy. But basically what I'm hearing from this question is that I'm hearing a little bit of, first of all, I see constantly worried about specific foods and ingredients, right? So I'm hearing a little bit of distress, right? There's some anxiety, some worry there. A need, and then also a need to kind of restrain, right? Because I can't go out to eat because they're not going to give me what I want, or I can only have this when I go out to eat. That's what I'm hearing there. So that is a little bit restrictive. Okay, I want to keep that in mind. So how do we handle this, right? Now you might be thinking the dietitian's going to say have bland steamed vegetables, right? Because that's healthy. That's diet culture. That's not what we want to hear, right? What we want to know is why are we feeling this way? And could we feel differently about it so that we could go to a restaurant, enjoy a nice meal with people we care about? I think we can. All right. So should I or should I not? All right. We could be tempted to think that certain foods or ingredients are off limits, even though there's no good evidence that we need to approach food that way. That's because of diet culture. Technically, all foods do fit into a meal pattern that emphasizes nutrition with a balance, right? A balance of eating the foods that are delicious and give us pleasure and balancing that social connection. All of those things serve us, right? So things like seed oils, MSG, sugar, dairy, they are not necessary for us to avoid. They are not the cause of disease. I don't have enough time today, but we certainly can do and ask the dietitian on what we've heard we should avoid. None of these are problematic, I promise you. Do you have to eat them? No. If you don't want to eat them, work with a dietitian and he or she can help you navigate what are appropriate substitutions for some of those things, right? But they are not a problem. I promise. There is a high degree of misinformation and even disinformation, so that's harmful information that we are exposed to in various outlets. What makes nutrition information potentially disinformation is when it causes us distress or anxiety because we now have this fear around food. That's a problem, right? Because the food itself is probably not as harmful as the fear is, right? So we want to recognize that. All the foods and ingredients we eat day in and day out, they all contribute to our pattern of eating. And a pattern of eating that's mostly nutritious is good enough. That's all it takes. We don't have to be perfect. We can include some of these things here and there, right? And again, if you want more specifics about proportions or percentages, a dietitian can help you navigate that, okay? It does allow for things like salt, MSG, sugar, and sugary foods. It's okay to eat those things, right? It's all about what else we're eating when we enjoy those things. MSG, vegetable seed oils are unequivocally not harmful. There's lots of information I can share about that, but yet that's not what we're like encountering online, right? Or if we're on social media, that's not what the diet culture is telling us. Consider how often you dine out and how that meal fits into your overall picture. When you feel ready, I think it's important to have a plan for the day and the night of this meal out because what's happening is it's like a loaded situation. You're already stressed about it, right? So that situation's probably a trigger for you and you're probably going to be restrictive, right? Or in this question, I heard that you eat a certain way so that when you go out to eat, you're not going to overeat because you're already kind of satisfied. That's fine, but it still is against intuitive eating where if you're hungry, yeah, it's time to eat. If you're full, maybe it's time to stop eating, right? So having a plan around this loaded situation, I think is important because it can be very stressful and we don't want to do things. We don't want to add to the stress when we're making changes. Friends, family, loved ones, even a counselor, especially a counselor, I would say, can help you work through these feelings. A dietitian that is versed in this can help as well. So important takeaways to consider is that there's no one way to be, one way to look, or one way to eat. We're not better people if we are, look, or eat the way any culture dictates. Be intentional about the language you use and the commentary you accept. I tell myself this regularly. I don't think the first thing out of my mouth needs to be, you look great, right? There's so many other things that I can compliment about somebody besides their appearance. Intuitive eating can help to heal our relationship with food. That's a really important step. That's really just trusting our body, trusting that we can be compassionate about what we're eating, and that will guide our process. Befriend your body. How do you want your friends, children, grandchildren to feel about their bodies? You probably are very complimentary no matter what they look like, right? And so I think it's important to do the same for ourselves. Okay, so resources and recipes, as I promised. So Ellen Satter is a dietitian, and her website is really fantastic. She has authored several books. She gives seminars. Like, she's the go-to dietitian as it relates to addressing emotional eating or especially eating disorders. So I just included a link to like one of her blog posts about the joy of eating, and how to really think about food and reframe our relationship with food. Six Factors Fit. I haven't had a chance to check this book out yet, but it's by Dr. Robert Kushner. And it's really like anti-diet, which I love. But it's about behavior change. And so it's really addressing the whole lifestyle, but also looking to change behaviors and habits, but most importantly, our mindset, how we look at food and our bodies. And if you're curious to learn more about food noise, sorry, Kindful Body it's an organization of different dietitians and licensed counselors, and you can seek their services as well. And it's a helpful website that I wanted to share with you as well. All right, as always, recipes. Who doesn't like a green smoothie? So I had to include a green smoothie. There's some nice eggs with spinach and black beans and lots of different things here. And then a lentil dal. That's like the best picture I could find, which I'm going to make because it looked delicious. Each of these recipes, I think, are mood enhancing because of what they contain. There's some fiber, there's some plant proteins, there's some magnesium, and then there's some other B vitamins that are, I think, really important in terms of helping enhance our mood. So if you're looking to do that as part of sort of a gift and self-care for yourself, I think that's part of the process of helping address emotional eating. And with that being said, we're going to end the program there. Our next Ask the Dietitian is in January. We're going to skip that first week and do January 10th. And we're going to start a little bit later. It's going to be at 2 p.m. just for the month of January. And we're going to appropriately talk about immune function and immune health and how food and nutrition might help us optimize those things. All right. So I'm going to stop my share. And thank you for being here.